First of all, welcome. You're very welcome. So I'll just give a brief introduction of Mr. Ajay. LFNB Protection Foundation brings to you the 10th lecture of the series Conservation of Forest, Environment, Wildlife and Allied Natural Resources. In this session, Mr. Ajay Desai, freelance wildlife consultant and advisor, will share his valuable experiences and insights on the topic human-wildlife conflict using elephant as a case study. Mr. Ajay Desai did his master's in marine biology Mr. Ajay Desai did his master's in marine biology from Center for Marine Biology, Karnataka University, Harvard, Karnataka. He holds around 35 years of long-field experience in studying the conservation of Asiatic elephants, human-elephant conflicts, and mitigation strategies involving strategic and anthropologic solutions, providing advisory and support in terms of capacity and competency building programs to the forest department. Apart from studying elephants, he has worked on large carnivores, namely tigers, leopards, and wild dogs, and other wild animals, namely gaur, sloth deer, four-horned antelope, Malabar giant squirrels, small carnivores, and birds. His work covers studies of these wild animals in various countries in Asia, namely India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Cambodia, and Laos. He has been actively associated with elephant conservation related projects in Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. He has several publications to his credit, which cover various aspects of elephant behavior, conservation, chemical restraint, migration, and human-elephant conflict. His publications also encompass various issues of other herbivores, namely blue bull, Asiatic jackal, and gaur. Currently, he is the member of Karnataka State Wildlife Board. And IUCN SSC Asian Specialist Elephant Specialist Group. He has acted as a co-chair of the group from 2005 to 2015. He held the first range-wide meeting of the governments of the Asian Elephant Range State in Malaysia in 2006, and also supported to organize an annual meeting of researchers on human-elephant conflict mitigation. He has been member of the Advisory Board for Environmental Management and Policy Research Institute, Department of Forest, Karnataka. He has been closely associated with Wildlife Institute of India for conducting management effectiveness evaluations of tiger reserve and protected areas. He has been a member of Karnataka High Court 2011-13 Task Force appointed for preparation of Elephant Task Force Report, a policy document on elephant conservation and conflict mitigation for Karnataka State. He has also been a part of the steering committee, Project Elephant 2005 to 2012, and as a member of the Project Elephant Task Force 2010. He was involved in the preparation of the Gaja report for MOEFCC to upgrade Project Elephant to better address elephant conservation and conflict mitigation. He has been associated with various prestigious organizations like DFS, GIZ, WWF, WII, Bombay Natural History Society, United Nations FAO, Global Environment Facility, Flora and Fauna, UK. He is currently also our scientific advisor. So, Mr. Ajay, with this brief introduction of yours, I would like to request you to start your presentation. You are most welcome on this platform and most welcome in this session. All the delegates are welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Shivanji, and namaste and good evening to all of you all. And I hope I can make this presentation useful. All of you all are senior forest officers with a lot of experience. So I'll share some of my views, my thoughts on human wildlife conflict with a specific focus on elephant related issues and how I look at it and what I think should be done. So I hope all of you can hear me properly, and let me just put my presentation.
Mr. Mansoor Khan, can you please stop presenting, please? You are in the presentation mode. Please stop presenting. Yes, Mr. Ajay, you can put on your presentation.
Yeah. Take one second. Okay, is the presentation visible to all?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I've done a lot of work in the Nilgiris in South India, part of Western Ghats, and it happens to be the home to the largest Asian elephant population in the world, and also possibly the largest tiger population. I think over 500 tigers and maybe about 8,500 elephants. So that has given me a lot of exposure to elephants in particular, and the conflict I've been doing research there from 1983. I've been involved in management and research activities in that landscape for a very, very long time. So as there were senior officers, I'll basically go through some of the ideas and thoughts that come to me. And what I would like to emphasize is some basic background points that we need to remember when we're dealing with human-wildlife conflict. One is with time things change. We need to adapt and become obsolete. Our ideas become obsolete. Our strategies become obsolete. Our tools become obsolete. Everything becomes obsolete with time. With time, we have to change. So what we need to recognize is with time, other things also have changed. People have changed. Countries have changed. So when we look at awareness and communication, one of the important things when we're dealing with wildlife conflict, one of the important things that we need to understand is that things around us have changed, and we have to either move along with those changes and adapt to those changes, or we remain in the background. For example, if you look at communication, we have grown from, our generation has grown from radio news, that too with limited access to radios, to TVs, to now today mobile in almost everybody's hand, including school kids, college kids, villagers, everybody. And this has meant that in earlier days, in our time of radios, when information from one village to the next village, today a villager sitting in Kanyakumari can get information virtually from anywhere. He can find out what's happening right now in Kashmir. He can find out what's happening right now in US. So information is a flood of information that's available to virtually everybody. So that changes people's mindsets, awareness, and a lot of other things. The other thing we need to look at is the economy and development. So there is a huge national aspiration for development, and there's individual aspiration for development. At the same time, we need to understand that there are increased costs of living which make things more challenging for people, and there's also competition within people for a better livelihood. This becomes what we call as the imperative that there's a developmental aspiration, there is pressure of highest costs and standards of living, to pressure of competition. Then there are cultural changes. This is very important for us to understand. Indians were ruled for thousands of years by kings, emperors. Forget who they were. We are not talking about whether it was Ashoka, it was prior to him, it was some other empire, or whether it was the Mongols or whether it's the British. Essentially, we were ruled by kings and emperors. And we were largely a subservient society. We didn't have a voice at that time when we were ruled to demand action. Okay, we depended entirely on the good-heartedness of the ruler to actually help us to do something or help us in our difficulties. It was not that we could go and demand. We didn't have any rights. So, if, for example, what I would say is that if you look at, I'll just give one example. This is a district gazette of Kodagu district, Karnataka. And in that gazetteer, the then district collector records, that's somewhere in the late 1800s or early 1900s, I think this gazette is from. He records that the people of Kodagu were facing a huge amount of problem from elephant conflict. They could not cultivate their crops, and the elephants were destroying virtually everything. So they went to the king of Kodu in those days to make an appeal for him to take some action. So the king agreed to take action, and he came down and camped in the Kodugu forest areas for 38 days. And in those 38 days, he personally killed about 180 elephants. His troops captured around 150 elephants. So roughly 300 plus elephants were removed from that area. But what is the message is that people at that time did not have an option of dealing with this problem on their own. They had to depend on the king and the good will of the king to come and do something about it. So there was this thing where we were subservient society. What we need to realize is that as managers today, we are facing what we call as the third generation and possibly now extending into the fourth generation of post-independence people. Population of India. First generation was completely subservient, as was the mentality that was inherited by them at the time of independence, followed by the second generation, which had partial, which is people like me and you, which were partially subservient. We are not really demanding in our rights. And today's generation is different. They know they have rights and they have justifiable reasons for asking for good governance. So this is very important for us to understand that very often we mistake this subservient behavior and a change to a more normal, a free state of mind today with tolerance and lack of tolerance. It is not tolerance and lack of tolerance, but rather it is a subservient behavior which is now changing into what we call is a more of a free mind, which is no longer answerable, which demands justifiable good governance. So if you look at also the other changes that are physical changes that have taken place, if you look at between 1980, I started my work somewhere in 1983. So if you look at from 1980 to 2020, that's a 40-year period we are looking at. India's population has grown from 70 crores to 135 crores. And the population has literally doubled. Elephant population from the 80s estimated at 15,000 is now around 30,000. Elephant population also has doubled. And at the same time, we look at habitat has actually reduced. We should not confuse tree cover with elephant habitat because tree cover also includes agricultural, agroforestry crops and other such things. The actual reserve forest areas remain the same or in some extent they have been reduced. Where we have competitive afforestation, it can often be in patches away from the main forest areas and consequently of not much value in terms of elephant habitat. So these are things we need to understand that these are the changes, whether it's a physical change, whether it's a cultural change, whether it's the socio-economic, this thing, the communication and the awareness, these things have changed and we need to respond to them. In this context, I would also like to go back a little bit and look at what is the dynamic interaction with wildlife. Our dynamic interaction. Our interaction has never been constant. It changes with time. When early hominids or earlier humans started bipedalism and came down to the ground, we were treated by large predators as prey species. Hominid from the, I think it was Australopithecus, the tongue child it's called, it had an injury on the skull. And
it's your connectivity, please.
It's on monkeys.
Yeah, Ram.
What do you call monkeys? Tool use, things changed. When humans started using tool, then we started becoming. So use what we have started was that we started changing from being a prey species to a predator. So we became what we call as a classical and apex predator. Creating here almost all animals. Any problem with the
Yeah, we are getting your connectivity is weak probably. There is a discontinuous voice.
Oh, okay. Just one second. Then you want me to? I'll just check.
Yes, please continue.
Can you hear? Hello?
Yeah, please continue. We can hear.
Okay. So, uh, so what we see is that we change into a predator, which essentially means human top predators like we talk about tigers or leopards or even lions and all that. They are scared of us. They will not stand if a human being comes and run away. Whether it's large mammals like gaur, elephant, rhino, again the same thing, run away from us. So we change the scenario from being a prey to a predator. And when you look at agriculture, which started about 10,000 years ago, that's my very recent in terms of the time scale. We're talking behavioral time scales. What we see is that agriculture in a scenario where animals are not scared of the fact that we had turned into apex predator and animals were afraid of us facilitated what we call as there in animals is the one that facilitates guarding of crop and other things. So going on from that, what we see is that with increasing technology, with increasing human population, and with increasing spread of people, there was a depletion of wildlife. More recent example of that would be in 1977, there was a report by Mr. Devidar, who was was working in the Nilgiris, and he was a lawyer by profession, but he used to do a lot of work on wildlife, done a lot of work on elephant conservation. Nilgiris, we have the Sigur Plateau, which is adjacent to the Madhumalai Tiger Reserve and just south of Bandipur Tiger Reserve. Sigur Plateau was a reserve forest area and it had a lot of cattle pens. And being a territorial area in the 70s, 80s, there was virtually a skeletal staff. There were only a handful of people. There was no vehicle. The area was large, about 460 square kilometers. Very few beat staff, very large beats, and no transportation, no road network, no ability to move around. So these cattle pens, which were scattered around within that area, which are legally scattered around because they had permits. Any cattle, they also can other things, and that would virtually wipe out all the carnivores. Having worked in that area during the early 80s, I do know that yes, there were packs of wild dogs dead, there were dozens of hyenas dead, there were vultures dead. So it was very common in that time to see these things. But the forest department, initially with research based data, from there the collector was roped in, and then what they did was they stopped the cattle penning business area. So they were there in 77 in a written report to the Nilgiri Wildlife Association writes that no tigers are present in the Sigur Plateau area due to poisoning. And he says as long as these cattle pens continue and this poisoning continues, no tiger will exist in this area. So in 94, by the 94, all the pens were closed and the area was left free for wildlife. Today we have nearly 45 tigers out there. So that shows that people could keep large mammals in control. Case of elephants, when we see the elephants, also we have the same story. Elephants became an economic tool of economic importance to the kings of the past and also to the British period. They were used in wars, they were used in manual labor, they were used in transport, and consequently, and logging operations. And I think consequently, scale capture and removal of elephants. In addition to elephants being shot out because of conflict and development of agriculture. So by 1873, actually the British started finding that the number of elephants is low and that the elephants they need for their work are getting reduced. So back in 1873 itself, the elephant was considered going down drastically in numbers to the point consequently they brought the Elephant Protection Act, which prohibited killing or capture of elephants by anybody, uh, government, and even if there were others engaged, they had to give the captive to the government. So we see that this depletion was there, and as we know, the was completely depleted. Our tiger numbers are testimony to that, and tiger numbers had dropped down till we came up with Project Tiger in 72. Then there's a change in the conservation scenario. When we look at the conservation scenario, in 1972, the Wildlife Protection Act came into play, the Forest Conservation Act in the 80s. Prior to that, they were this thing, but they were not really enforced, or it was not really focused or targeted. So what we do see is that the focus on conservation kind of started changing in the 72. And with the Act and also the introduction of Project Tiger, things started changing, and has over the period of time been improving. And as I mentioned, testimony to that is the growing tiger numbers, the growing elephant numbers, animals are spreading into different areas. We now see it as that wildlife is now making a big comeback in India. And as a consequence of this protection, what has also happened is there's a decline. They are not facing real threats in many places. So animals are no longer what you call afraid. So you can also see that in terms of your tourism when we see wildlife in what we call many of the tiger reserves. The tigers no longer are afraid of people. They come out in the open, the vehicles, they don't bother about vehicles, they just go around because, now they're coming back to their apex predator status. In the sense, apex predator does not hide or run away. Apex predator walk no longer the apex predator. They are now shifted to a role where they are taking on the role. Although they ignore people, they are in the local system an apex predator. So when we talk about wildlife, when we talk about human-wildlife conflict, I'll go on to explain that. But there are two aspects. But in terms of what is it that we are trying to mitigate? That's the most important thing. So when we say mitigation of human-wildlife conflict, what is it? Now there are three main issues that are related to human-wildlife conflict. One is direct. Other is threat to livelihoods, direct crop loss, property loss, damage, whatever it is. And then the third is obviously the quality of life. In this, what we must realize is presently what we are addressing is only just two aspects of the three subtopics. One is only addressing life and injury, where we are giving compensation and treatment. There's also the factor that here, during attacks, which do not result in injury, people are attacked. So this creates a fear psychosis. We must understand that fear psychosis is something which is very important. Fear psychosis results in people towards wildlife. Their work and other things being impeded because of the presence of wildlife. Now that is not taken into consideration or big challenge, unaddressed challenge. In terms of life loss and the property damage, there are huge amount of indirect losses. For example, if people are into, for example, livelihoods, which may be dependent on forests. If there is a dangerous elephant or if there is a man-eating tiger in that area, the people cannot go and collect their resources. Consequently, their livelihoods are impacted. We talk about crop guarding, where crop guarding, we don't realize it involves a lot of sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation has a lot of health and psychological impacts on people. Sleep deprivation is considered to be extremely dangerous. If you talk to any doctor, he'll tell you it's one of the worst forms of problems you can get into by due to sleep deprivation, because not only does your health get affected very adversely, you are psychologically then very unstable. Your interaction with other people, your interaction with their families become damaged. Tools and things for crackers and other things, which are costs, which are basically hidden costs, which we do not take into consideration. The last is the quality of life, because according to what we say, human well-being, also quality of life is one of the important criteria based on our governments and based on international standards. So quality of life is again not at all addressed in human-wildlife conflict. Quality of life means that the inability to improve my standard, suffering constant minor losses. There might be minor losses, but they're not allowing me to improve my livelihood, standard of living. Inability to carry about normal activities, because we see in one of the big challenges in many of the elephant conflict areas is that people are unable to go about social activities like functions, other things in the evenings, early mornings, simply because of the presence of elephants. So it inhibits them from doing normal things. Then the other thing is the stress of being constantly exposed to dangerous animals. So this stress, it could be in individuals and their families. This can have adverse impact on people. So this is another aspect which is not generally taken into consideration. And this can have an adverse impact in that people can then start, because of these things, without even realizing, they can become antagonistic towards the department and also towards wildlife conservation. The next question is often one of the most debated is the government responsible for human-wildlife conflict mitigation, and why? Now, according to the Constitution, the fundamental which guarantees Article 21 guarantees the right to life, an integral part of right to life. Now, this has been settled by the Supreme Court in the pavement dwellers case, I think 75, in the Bombay pavement dwellers case. It says that the fundamental right to life is meaningless without a right to livelihood. Livelihood does not mean the government guarantees livelihood to the people. It means that the government will ensure that unnecessary or livelihoods are not spoiled or destroyed by unnecessary action. So it essentially means if somebody's livelihood is being blocked because of failure of the government to do something, then that's a responsibility. It's not that the government will give him a job or something else. So that is important, that we are also protecting livelihoods as a fundamental constitutional right. So that government's part of the government's duty. According to Wildlife Protection Act, the wildlife is is the property of responsible for the actions of terms of managing conflict. The government can act independently. For example, if there's a tiger which has come out or a leopard which has come out and that has to be captured and taken, translocated or brought back or put in the zoo, then the government can act independently. Entirely through a government process, it can capture, translocate and keep the animal somewhere else. It can collaborate. There is a electric fence to be put, for example, in a deer. The government can give partial subsidy for that fence, whereby or the government can put the fence, the people can manage it, or they can both share the cost and build 50-50 this thing where government subsidizes 50% or 30% or whatever it is of a fence. So it's a joint thing. Or if it's patrolling in the evening to protect crops, it could be the government staff combining with the local people, which you call local community-based crop protection squads or whatever. So it could be collaborative, or it can directly empower people to take do fencing on their own. They can do guarding on their own. So although it's a government responsibility, government can act in three different ways. I act independently, act in collaboration with the people, or empower people to take action for mitigating conflict. So this has to be borne in mind. I need some clarity about conservation, because there's a lot of confusion coming in as to what constitutes conservation, what constitutes conflict mitigation, where things should be done. When we look at India, I've made a very crude diagram, please excuse that. So what we see here is that, we have about 10% of the land area. Supposing that the rectangle is the whole land area of India, then about 10% of it is what we call is classified as is reserve forest. Another 5% is reserve forest, which has been classified as protected area, sanctuary, national park, or whatever. Effectively, the whole management. Then there's about another 80%, which is purely human use areas. Within this 80%, there's about 5 to 7%, which is under tree cover, which could be potentially, it could be a crops, it could be a mango orchard, it could be a eucalyptus plantation, it could be a forest patches, scrub patches which are come under community land, or it could be under the revenue department. So such land together. So totally it will come out 22% of area would be under tree cover. But out of that, actual forest area which is under the control of forest department would be roughly around 15%, 16%. So we must realize that, the bulk of a conservation, particularly animals which come into high conflict, particularly animals which are physically dangerous to people, will occur largely within this 15%. So once they come out of that 15%, then you have what we call this very serious conflict and the potential for serious conflict. Although instantly it cannot start, there could be potential. So in this world, while human-wildlife conflict may involve both adverse impact of people on wildlife, adverse impact of wildlife on people, we are addressing the wildlife angle purely through the conservation process, where the conservation primarily focused on welfare of animals. Conflict mitigation, therefore, should the adverse impact on people. So, in this context, what is important for us as managers to understand is that conservation should address the adverse impact of this thing. But in that, what we need to understand is we need to focus our major conservation efforts, particularly for the department. In the remaining 80%, we need to be very careful and is involved in trying to conserve wildlife within. It's not that we should remove all wildlife from the 80%. It's not that. What can be conserved? What is the consequence of that conservation in a meaningful way and in a way that does not become very adverse to people? That is what should be seen. So that has to be done in a very say that yes, let elephants live inside agricultural areas, or you cannot let tigers live in cities or villages. That's not realistic. So we need to understand where they can live and where they can't live in that remaining 80%. The other important thing is to understand where conflict occurs. Now, very often what happens is that we think that conflict is very general. It's very specific. Where it occurs is very important. Conflict can occur actually inside the forest areas where we could have settlements, or it could be people going inside the forest for resource collection. They have right to do that resource collection, right to NTFP collection. So those people can come into conflict. The villages inside the forest could come into conflict. Around those villages, there could be conflict. So those are conflicts that happen inside the forest area, inside the forest. Then what we have is the interface between forest and the purely human use areas. That's agriculture, settlement, all that, which is out the forest. At the interface area, obviously, there'll be a little bit of back and forth movement of both people and wildlife into each other's territory, and there's conflict along that area. Then what we have is where wildlife actually extend deep into human use areas. They could either occupy what we call small forest patches outside, which are called refuge. They could also occupy what we call fallow land. They could occupy scrub and other things along streams, rivers, where they left fallow. So these are what we call niches which they can occupy and from which conflict can spread to other areas. So 3 different areas. So one is inside human use areas, deep inside human use areas. One is of the interface, the other is inside them. So the approaches and management of these will always be different in terms of conflict mitigation. Then the next question comes is, why do elephants come into conflict? Why do elephants? It could be anything. It could be tigers. Why do leopards come into conflict? One is opportunistic. Here I put it as opportunistic trading. Opportunistic conflict, opportunistic killing. It is that if a crop field is left unguarded or is poorly guarded, and it sees the unguarded crop field with a large amount of crop food, which is there, easily accessible, quickly consumable, and then it will obviously get tempted to go and raid from. Okay, if there is somebody stopping that from raiding, guarding or something, yes, it will get stopped. But if there is no one guarding it, or if the is very poor, then it will raid. So this is opportunistic. It means it does not need to do it, but it will do it because there is an opportunity. Same thing with cattle. If cattle are grazing inside unguarded, because they are very easy to kill domestic cattle as opposed to wild herbivores. So what you call is opportunistic. It's not necessary, but really good. Now, if this pattern is allowed to persist with that particular animal, then it becomes habitual. And when it becomes habitual and the animal starts going systematic, what people do is then they try to start taking action. But by then it has got used to this particular style of feeding. And when people try to stop it, then initially it might react to them saying, I mean, in the sense it might react with a little bit of fear. But gradually, if it starts understanding that all they do is, for example, in case of elephants, all we do is shout, beat drums, firecrackers. So the elephant eventually realizes these are only making noise and there's no problem with that. I can go and raid. So it will continue doing that. Then we put up an electric fence, I'll shock. It moves away. Then it realizes the shock is not life-threatening. And then it starts breaking the fence, or it learns how to break the fence and come inside. So what we are creating by not doing proper conflict mitigation at the very onset, we are creating what we call is habitual. It's just like what we have the drug addicts or alcoholics who will do anything. You know, my alcoholic might sell everything in the house for the sake of drinking. He might rob and steal for the sake of getting money to drink. So essentially what we are doing is the initial opportunistic trading to take place. Then there's other reality is that yes, is what we call is obligate raiding or obligate call. The habitat gets too degraded because of cattle grazing or fuel wood removal or whatever other human activities, or it gets part of it is lost due to developmental activities. It is fragmented due to some development. In this case, the habitat of the animal is reduced and consequently inadequate food. Now, same thing happens with tigers. If there is a poor line and then there's nothing to eat, or in case tiger might get displaced, get injured, whole tiger, and then get pushed to the periphery. Or a young tiger may not be able to animals. It can't occupy any new territory, it might get pushed to the boundary. So when it comes to the boundary, there's inadequate food. So let us eat food in the human use areas. It crosses the interface area and tries to get food outside. Now, this is what we call obligate. Obligate in the sense, if we stop it, then the animal is bound to die because of reduced food supply, associated stress with that, and the need to push inside. So, constantly trying to come. For example, typically a young tiger which is being pushed to the periphery because of lack of food, it starts raiding cattle. That thing is stopped. The animal is confined inside. Then it has to try and find a territory inside. So it starts moving inside and comes into conflict with resident tigers and get killed. Same thing with the elephant. It goes inside. It tries to push inside because of social hierarchies. It gets pushed around. It creates problems with other elephants. The other elephants create problems for people. So these problems can continue escalating. So it's what we call it the to resolve. So in obligate and also in some cases behavioral, we also have what we call is dispersing elephants. We are talking about dispersing elephants, but we also have dispersing large carnivores for behavioral reasons. Obligate animals might try to leave the habitat and go out and essentially move into find new habitat or new areas for them to settle, which they generally cannot because there is no free space left for them anymore. And much of the transit has to happen through human use areas. So consequently, they come into very high levels of conflict. Again, these animals are extremely difficult to manage. Then we have what we call is the other problem of people entering forests. They might be living, so they're just like our families, our relatives. But only thing is they're matriarchal in the sense the females and they go out to avoid inbreeding. So what essentially happens is that they have a fixed home range because they need to know where resources are. Within that home range, they have seasonal home ranges. Now, typically, I've shown some home ranges of elephants in the study area, which were radio colored. Then you see that of the four, they are different in terms of the thing. There are some of them overlapping. Then there are what we call is dominance hierarchies. Who uses what area when is decided by dominance hierarchy. And they have different seasons, wet season, dry season, and some even have 3 seasons, first wet season, dry season, second wet season range. And they move between these very systematically. And what then happens is, wherever, suppose, for example, if we have a linear development which fragments the habitat, depending on where the linear development cuts that home range, that will be the degree to which the adverse impact will affect that particular clan which has been impacted, and all other clans through which that barrier cuts through. So our actions generally, like it's the same like a tiger home range. If part of a tiger's home range on the periphery is developed for a settlement or something, then the tiger which is in that territory will get displaced. But what happens is, while it is directly affected, it could also impact other tigers in the adjoining territory when it tries to move in. Then there'll be rips and bites and all such things, which will also affect other animals in that area. So essentially what we need to understand is it's not a random effect, but it's a very specific individual based thing, which can also have impacts on other animals in response. When this one responds to a particular change, to a particular impacted animal responds to change, it can in turn impact other animals and cause greater conflict. This becomes critical. So, like we say, now tiger identification has become very important in case of problem animals. The first thing they demand is how do you know which animal was involved in the conflict? So that's very important, because without that, because we had this thing of captures for sake of conflict mitigation in Northeast India right up to 80s, where about 100 to 200 elephants could be captured to mitigate conflict, and there was no criteria. So elephant A is causing the conflict, and somebody goes and catches elephant B. So now conflict is not resolved at all. The A continues creating, B had nothing to do with conflict and has been captured and removed. So it's very important to understand what we are doing. And to understand that, when you put radio collars and study the three males for raiding crops, now you can see the three males, the big bull on the top left, there's the makna, which is a tuskless male on top right, and there's a young middle-aged tusker at the bottom right. Now the map on the left shows the ranges of these three bulls. Now all three of them range in the same type of vegetation. The vegetation does not change. It's moist deciduous to dry deciduous. Then all three have settlements within their home range, where paddy is grown, where coconut trees are there, where banana is there, and where areca is there. All three have access to areas outside the forest, which is almost entirely coffee estates. So there is coffee, there is paddy, there is banana, there is areca nut, and there is coconut. And they have mostly moist deciduous with elements of dry deciduous forest within their home range. They are all identical. So even though their habitat is identical, their raiding behavior is completely different. The animal on the top left does not raid crops at all, surprisingly. It's a big tusker, doesn't raid crops. The local people know it. They don't disturb it. They don't interfere with it. It does not interfere with them. It leaves them alone. The makna, the young makna on the top right, now that one raids crops on a very daily basis. Every night it is raiding something or the other. When the paddy is removed and everything is removed, it comes to the home gardens, damages banana, damages areca nut and coconut trees. So it's on a daily basis. The bull on the bottom is largely a problem animal during the paddy season. When paddy rice is being cultivated, it starts coming and raiding crops. So three different types of raiding. And animals operating in the same area. So we really don't know why and how these things happen. But essentially what happens is there are a lot of behavioral differences, and we need to understand how and why these happen. And that's only something that research can tell you after much more detailed studies. The other thing we also, from elephant's work, we know is that there is a positive correlation between the degree of fragmentation and the degree of conflict. Now, this is logical because the more perimeter I create, the more of fragmentation I create, the more of conflict I'm going to get. But yes, there is evidence, database evidence to show that this is very important. So more fragmentation equals to more conflict. So conflict mitigation, when we talk about, we need to understand that there are three stages to that. One is the drivers, the factors that cause conflict. Now, as we already mentioned, there are habitat loss, degradation, fragmentation. Then it could also be wildlife population growth and unmanaged wildlife conflict situations, which are allowed to grow into bigger problems. Now, these are the drivers of conflict. These are actually the bases. If you do not address these, you will never be able to resolve conflict because it will continue growing. It's like a pot with a hole. You're trying to fill the pot and it's got a hole. Now, as long as you don't block that hole, the pot is never going to get full. So, essentially, you start by filling that hole. So, but unfortunately, in the case of drivers of conflict, many of them are very complex and they need a lot of effort. So first is addressing the drivers of conflict. So if you don't address that, your conflict will perpetually increase, expand in terms of areas where it happens, quantity of conflict will increase, and the intensity will increase. So that's the first step. The second step is preventive. Now, once we have looked at that, you have to look at all three at the same time. You can't look at them as 1, 2, and 3, but they're all three, but then they require different solutions. in terms of preventive measures, it's very important that we understand that the interface area is which has to be managed, because you want to prevent animals from coming out and creating problems. You want them to remain in the forest. So in this case, what happens is, in terms of prevention, we have two types. One is deterrents and the other is barriers. Deterrents are things like guarding, automated sound and light making devices, patrolling around the border, drive teams which go around and chase them back from agricultural areas. Those are deterrents which will actually deter an animal from coming into a crop field and aiding. Barriers are things which prevent an animal from entering. Okay? Prevention can be in terms of psychological or it can be physical. Like an electric fence is actually a psychological barrier because it has no real physical capacity to stop large animals from breaking through. It's a psychology that pulsed current that hits them, the shock, is what keeps them away. This is pulsed current, it's not harmful, but it's that no animal likes to get it, but some get habituated. That's a different issue. Then there are physical barriers, like in case of elephants, it could be elephant-proof trenches, it could be rail fences, it could be walls. Now, same thing with wild pig. We have classically we put a wall. People also use nylon netting. They use nylon cloth along the perimeter, so the pigs can't jump. You just need about 3 feet, 4 feet cloth, and it stops the pigs from entering. So these are barriers which stop the animal. Now this is to preventive measures where you stop the animal from coming into conflict. Then the last is to reduce. So if you cannot, what we call your drivers are being addressed, your preventive measures, but still some animals are bound to come out. Some way, some system might fail, something might happen. The animal comes out, it causes conflict. So here what happens is that, yes, then you compensate them. It could be compensation, ex gratia, it could be insurance, or whatever other scheme. It will also be like indirect measures like, improving the resilience of the people. Improving resilience means like increasing their income so that they can withstand losses. Increasing income could be like, to a value addition of their products or their agricultural produce. It could be an additional source of income. It's like, you give them, let's say, keeping bees. So this extra income which comes in can make them more resilient to crop depredation problems. So when you look at drivers of conflict, habitat loss, all of you are aware of habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation. So I'll not get into that. But yes, there are numerous ways in which habitat is very adversely impacted. And there are ways of addressing it which are difficult but attainable. So I'll just give one example of fuel wood consumption. Now, the fuel wood consumption, India is probably the largest consumer of fuel wood in the world in terms of country-based thing. And if you can see those dots, the world map is not very clearly visible. It's too light. But the brown dots, what you can see, the largest one sits on India. And globally, we are the number one consumers of fuel wood for human use. So reducing fuel wood now would appear a challenge. Now, for example, there was this project which a couple of friends of mine started in Bandipur Tiger Reserve along with the Forest Department. The initial target was to target, Bandipur has got a large 220-kilometer boundary with about 200 villages within a 7-kilometer radius of that boundary. So initially, the target was, even if we can change 4,000 or 5,000 households from fuel wood to LPG, it will be a big boon. Once the project started, this is almost like 14, 15 years, 16 years now it's been running. What we see is that 38,000 connections have been given, which is addressing about over 80% of the families which are households that are in that area. And average refill rates are once in 3 months for the whole area, which basically means that it's very similar to the lower middle income groups in urban areas. So it means that they're using very extensive use of LPG is taking place in that. Almost 80% people have shifted to that. So the reason they succeeded was the cost of an LPG cylinder to them is about 3 or 4 days work. And if they are 3-4 days labor, if they use, that is the cost of the LPG cylinder for them. So the mere fact that they're using it for 3 months means that they're saving on 8 working days by not collecting fuel wood or paying for it. So essentially what happens is economically it makes a lot of sense to use LPG rather than fuel wood. Then there are reduced health this thing, issues. It increases work time because they're not sick. It improves children's schooling because children are not exposed to smoke. Then quicker and easier cooking is there. So what has happened is now, did this have an impact? The question is most important for managers is, did it have an impact? There was a study doing at NDVI value changes over the 16 years. And it takes into consideration changes in rainfall, it changes in other factors and all the other things, agriculture around that area, everything. Now, if you look at the NDVI value improvement, yes, look at Bandipur between 2000 and 2015, that period. Overall, the park, there's a gradual trend. The upper dotted line is a gradual trend showing there's a gradual increase in the NDVI value within Bandipur Tiger Reserve, which is a positive thing because there's improved management. But what you see is the dark line at the bottom, the solid line at the bottom shows a very drastic increase in NDVI values. Okay, initially it was at almost like 0.7 this thing, and whereas initially the interior forest was at 0.85, and this was around 0.7. Now what we see is that the periphery has now already reached up to almost is reaching up to 8.4, 8.3 levels, and that has only marginally increased to about from 8.5 it has increased to about 8.6, 8.7. So the periphery is now catching up with the interior of the habitat, and periphery is the area where fuel wood collections used to take place. So it very clearly shows that over a 16-year period, because of this conversion from LPG, from fuel wood to LPG, the forest has improved significantly, and it has also had positive benefits on the people. Fuel wood smoke impacts about 800 million people in India. It's the biggest killer of women in rural India, and almost 1 million deaths are attributed to it, cooking smoke. Then it adversely impacts children's health. Nearly 39% of neonatal stillbirths are attributed to cooking fumes. That's cooking smoke. Health-related problems result in reduced income and increase in medical expenses. Exposure to wildlife is eliminated because people go into the forest for fuel wood, they get exposed to dangerous animals like tigers, bears, and elephants. So that is reduced. So it's a win-win situation where people win, the forest wins. Now, in this scenario, now this is just one aspect. Now, there are numerous other things, which we look livelihood dependencies on forests. Those need to be addressed. A range of things. So, for that, when we realize who are the stakeholders, it's the line departments. Okay, the forest department does not have the money, does not have the capacity, does not have the resources to deal with these problems entirely on its own. Their mandate, it does not fit into its mandate also. So, the mandate lies with many line departments like tribal development, rural development, development, education, small-scale industries, all these things. They all have a role to play in that. So it's very important that we need to understand what are the role of RAN. Then there's also, line departments also have what you call positive and negative impact. Like it could be a highway going through the forest. That can have an adverse impact. If highway collaborates with the and says, okay, we're putting a road through this area, where should we put it? How should we put it? And if you put it in the forest, then what are the mitigation tools we need so that we do not create a conflict situation tomorrow or we do not adversely impact wildlife? So there are things which the line departments can do and they should do. And there has to be a structured framework in which there is constant interaction, which will help minimize adverse impact by any line department on the forest and the conflict situation. At the same time, there are line departments which can facilitate in reducing anthropogenic pressures, also improve conflict mitigation resolution. So these are things which need to be leveraged. And as I said, elephant department, the forest department can't do it entirely on its own. It needs the support of these other departments. The other thing is the elected representatives. They can provide guidance to local communities. They can facilitate coordination between communities and forest department and line departments. So this is very important. So if they play a role, if they engage, then they can bring about a lot of change. Local and village elders can help in positive engagement with communities. Then local communities, obviously, they are the main stakeholders. They need to be engaged. In addition to this, other community organizations like NGOs, research organizations, others can play a role. Then we talk about unmanaged conflict. Now, classically, what happens is when the conflict has not been managed in a systematic way, it increases and keeps growing. Here is the example. The map shows you the northern part of Nagarole Tiger Reserve. And what you see is the green line encloses the Tiger Reserve. The areas on outside the Tiger Reserve are entirely coffee estates with the little brown mosaics you can see. They are the paddy cultivation areas. So what happens is elephants from these Nagarole and the reserve forests to the north of it, they gradually start raiding into the coffee estates. Now, once they enter coffee estate, it's almost like a forest for them. So they have very easy cover, good cover, they have foraging areas, and they tend to move. So populations from Nagarole gradually start infiltrating into the Kodagu coffee area, coffee zones. Now, since this has not been addressed in any meaningful way over the years, the populations, what used to happen was initially the animals would go out and come back, go out and come back. What was the interface area? Then became animals going out and staying inside the coffee permanently. So you have animals which are now permanently residing within the coffee estate. Now, not only that thing, the animals are keeping on expanding their range in the coffee area. So this expansion will continue till the entire coffee belt is occupied by elephants. What do you do then? So initially, when we look at it, there was a raiding across the border. So that could be easily managed. It was not managed. Elephants were allowed to go inside. Few elephants went out initially. So, okay, let's assume that 20, 30 elephants had gone out and then you had a problem and you didn't know what to do. But you said, okay, let me capture these 20 and bring them inside and the very strong barrier around so they can't go out. Or I bring these 20 into captivity. Now, that was not done. So 20 has become now an estimated 250. Now, the question is if we leave it in the next 10, 20. So, do I deal with a problem that is about coming in and going out with a single barrier? Do I deal with 20 elephants? Do I deal with 250 elephants? Or do I deal with 500 elephants? This is my option. So in hindsight, we can always say, yes, we should have stopped them at the very beginning. We didn't. We should have stopped them when they were 20. We didn't. We should. Now, the question is, should we stop it at 250? Or should we keep on letting it pass on to the next generation? So generation after generation, if we leave things, then they become problems which are virtually impossible to resolve in a meaningful or a humane way. Is what I'm trying to mention here. So letting a problem grow is one of the ways in which conflict can escalate and also becomes very difficult to manage at a later date. Typically, another example is this is the home range area of, I'd really call it a male and a female group in this area. And now this area covers about 300 square kilometers. The green indicates coffee estates. The yellow indicates the paddy, home and agriculture. And the red indicates villages. Now, where is the reserve forest in this? The reserve forest is about only 10%, which is in tiny fractions of 5 hectares, 10 hectares, 50 hectares. The largest single patch is 2.5 square kilometers. So obviously it doesn't show up much anyway. The area is over 300 square. Now, mind you, this is 300 of the ranging area. Now, in addition to this, there are other areas where elephants are operating. Now, you can very well understand, now this is virtually a non-habitat for any wildlife in general, any large mammal. Now, here you have elephants. Now, what happens when they range is this is how they're ranging across this area. You have very high conflict, very high serious conflict in this area. Now, obviously, we went through this whole process of trying to address this issue. Initially, I was asked by the government to give a report on this. So I did give a report saying this elephant conservation is not possible because there is no land for conserving elephants. It's all private property and it's all human use areas. So consequently, remove the elephants. Now, obviously, there was a court case. After we captured 2 elephants, there was a court case, and then there was a committee appointed. The committee went through all sorts of things to look at how to resolve. My basic question was, you tell me how to conserve elephants there. And I'm fine with it. But they could not come up with anything but to say that you remove elephants. Anyway, the elephants have still not been removed, partially removed, 25 elephants were removed. There are still about 50 elephants. And that number will keep growing because they're breeding. And there's nothing to constrain them. They're expanding range. When I did my first assessment, there were 38 villages which were impacted. Currently, there are about 78 villages which are impacted, which shows that, yes, the problem is growing. So question remains is how long do we continue with this kind of conservation approaches? Now, dispersals are the other challenge. It looks very nice that, we're getting a range expansion. Now, this is a dispersal that's taking place in elephant range. There are a couple of them which are not actually put out here. We have dispersals from Karnataka, within Karnataka, and into Maharashtra, into Goa, into Andhra. Then we have Kerala animals going into Tamil Nadu. We have this is what we are talking about. We're not talking about dispersal from forest to forest. We're talking about dispersal from the forest area into human use areas, by and large. So we are getting new problems all across India, including Chhattisgarh elephants, which came out from Bihar. Now they went to, this is when they called me there. I remember they had called me to Chhattisgarh in the I think when was it, several years back. And at that time, I told them, what you're seeing today is not the limit of what elephants are going to stop. They're going to continue expanding their range. And this is what I told Achiever. I gave it to him in writing, saying that their ranges are going to increase and will continue increasing. And presently, we have elephants in Madhya Pradesh, which is exactly what I said would happen at that time. So these things we need to understand is what is dispersal, how it happens, and what is the consequences. Now, as the consequence of the dispersal, we must realize that hundreds of elephants have been killed. A couple of thousand people have been killed. And the contribution to conservation remains very skeptical is what really is the contribution of this to conservation. We have no idea. As far as I can tell from the few places that I've studied, whether it's Andhra or I know a little bit about West Bengal, the thing is we have not really gained much, whether it's Maharashtra, very classically. Okay. Did we get a conservable population in Maharashtra? Answer is no. How many elephants died? How many people died? For what is the question. Then what happened to the Karnataka population in that area? That has been depleted genetically because the animals have moved out. The population become even more genetically unviable than it was earlier. So what is the gain is the more question here. Who gains? Does wildlife gain? Do people gain? Does conservation gain? Nothing. So we don't have what you call a real tangible outcome, we are not going to be anything. The populations, when you look at population growth is the other one. We are talking about population which grow naturally. All populations grow naturally, as we know from our tiger year-on-year tiger data. That yes, we do have a large number of growth. So translocation to vacant areas is one habitat. Immunocontraception is what we are talking about. So there are challenges, technical and financial challenges, how best to do it. Then in terms of preventive measures, then we are talking about, like I said, again, I'm not going to details because you are all wildlife people, you all know that. Yes, in terms of preventive measures, we have barriers, we have guarding, we have elephant drive, we have deterrence. Then technology for reducing impact can also be brought in, early warning systems using electronics and radio collars. Early warning can also be a simple tripwire in case of herbivores. Then comes removal. Removal is not necessarily removal of the animal. Removal can also be, for example, when you have this resettlement for tiger reserves, yes, that also is removal. But the people and the agriculture is removed from the conflict zone. It could be change in crops, non-palatable crop is brought in. Then yes, the herbivore can no longer eat it. So that is removal of the palatable crop from that area. And lastly comes obviously the removal of the problem animal. So it can be a movement of the people, it can be movement of the resource like cattle grazing. If cattle grazing predation is there during grazing, if people take up to better quality cattle and shift to stall feeding, then yes, obviously depredation on cattle will reduce or disappear. There are different types of barriers when we talk about, but then again, each has to suit the local area. And yes, depending on the intensity of the conflict, obviously you don't put huge amount of money on a barrier where conflict is minimum. You manage it in the context of what is the level of conflict and how many animals are there. But also we need to take into account how animals react, because elephants are very intelligent, very flexible with their tools. You see one elephant is trying to break a fence using its tusk, because their tusk is electric fence, because the tusk is a non-conductor. And then the physical strength of the animal has to be taken. Even though they put barbed fences and all that, elephants have managed to break it and go through. Then poor quality construction, lack of capacity. The person doing it does not understand what is required. Poor quality construction, the animals can breach it and go. Compensation, again, the compensation is a challenge where we are talking about you can't give adequate compensation, because adequate compensation then means that the people will not take any action to prevent conflict. So it becomes a money-making racket for the local people. You pretend to grow something and then you say my crop is damaged and then you take money for that. But essentially we need to have some sort of a compensation scheme. Then payments of compensation have to be prompt and other things. Things are improving. Human life cannot be compensated. Also, loss of earning member or a parent often results in very drastic impacts on families. So Kodagu in Karnataka, they have looked at creation of a foundation which will handhold families where the earning member or a parent has been killed, so that till the point that the child becomes independent. Okay, through school and college, that till he becomes adult, 18 years, they will handhold that family to make sure that they come out of that cycle. So they want to bring in psychological this thing, they want to bring in social and economic benefits so that they can come out of the system. Then we need to bring in other agencies, whether it's the agriculture department or the insurance or this thing. Then compensation awareness is important. For example, this is just a research where we looked at compensation, and newly started Satyamangalam Tiger Research. So what we looked at was the challenges like, 49% of people did not report the cattle killed because they didn't know anything about it. Some reported that the staff who visited were not sure how to determine till when it happened, whether it was tiger or something, and they could not tell them not to report it because they were not there. Then quite a number, 6% of the claims were rejected, and only 14% were paid. Now, there was a need here, very clearly it shows that, when I do analysis, I tell myself that, yes, I need to make people aware, I need to make the field staff aware of how to evaluate the system. So there is a two-way training program needed here, where the staff have to be given the skills to determine actual predator kills, determine whether the actual predator kills or natural deaths. Then also the community has to be given awareness that there's a compensation scheme and how to go about getting it. Then we looked at cost in terms of time and other things which I'll not get into. So the other thing, one of the important things is in the compensation, one of the kills we monitored had 4 different tigers coming to that kill. So essentially it means that if I fail to do compensation, then it means that 4 different tigers have potential of being killed. Then there are innovative approaches which are there. Governments are talking about private consultancies, they're talking of technologies, they're talking about involving line level, obviously I mentioned that. Then improving veterinary support for human-wildlife conflict. Health issues also very important in wildlife, and those components of disease, whether it's surrender pest, whether it's foot and mouth disease, all these things, or it could be on distemper, canid distemper, all these things are very critical for conflict mitigation. The other important thing is knowing how and why conflict is taking place. For example, when you looked at human sloth-bear conflict, this is again in one particular area only, so it's not applicable elsewhere. So when you look at that particular study we did, we found that bear attacks impacted 76% of people who were grazing cattle. 14% were doing NTFP. Fuel wood collection, going to temple, open defecation were very nominal, 3% each. So if you, as a manager, if you wanted to address the single biggest problem, you would try to look at how to resolve the problem of cattle grazers getting attacked by bears. The next target would be NTFP collection. Your last focus would be on fuel wood collection, temples, and open defecation. Okay, because that is the least. It will solve the least amount of your problem. Your primary problem lies elsewhere. Similarly, we looked at locational deaths of humans in Gujarat division killed by people. Now, this is the forest map, and the red dots show you where the actual attacks took place. You see, it's always on the periphery or inside human use areas rather than in the forest. So, where did the attack occur? 46% inside estates, tea and coffee estates, 17% on roads and paths, 17% occurred inside forest areas, rest in agriculture and settlement areas. So, the bulk of the problem happens inside, or inside, outside in the estates or on the roads. Nearly 73%. So 63, sorry. Then we also looked at the time. Now, how you look at it is very important. If you look at the maximum number of deaths that take place, they take place between morning to night. That is the upper part. If you look at it, that's 7 in the morning to 9 in the night is the bulk of the deaths taking place. But if you look at it on an hourly basis, okay, then it tells you precisely when are the most dangerous times. For example, it tells you per hour how many people got killed in the per unit hour period. Okay, like between 7 and 8 across all days, how many people got killed. Then what you see is that the early morning period between 5 and 7 is the most dangerous. The evening period between 6 and 9 is the most dangerous. These two periods is what? The middle period is not relevant. Between 7 and 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening is not of importance. The least number of deaths are going to take place. Therefore, now when you say people have to do behavioral changes, when you look at this part, this is the part, the early part when you look at the morning between up to 7, is when people are beginning to go out for their work in most areas. So they're going out for work, they're going out for their morning duties. Then here you can also bring in education. Now we have to look at whether that is actually a major role. Now some people are going morning out, they're going for open defecation, they're getting killed. The problem is give them toilet, they won't be dead. Now does that work out that way? That's what we have to see. Evening they're coming back from work, they're coming back from shopping or whatever other work they're attending. So we cannot tell people to stop going to work and stop coming back from work. That is the reality. So behavioral changes are not going to help here. As very commonly say, adjust your behavior and everything will be fine. No. So when we look at the thing, other thing they say is people drink and results in weight loss. So we looked at 79% of the people had not consumed any alcohol. Only 21% of the people had consumed alcohol. And what we know from this thing is only 11% of Indian population is classed as heavy drinkers. The rest are not. They're just casual drinkers who take a little bit of alcohol. Now, 21% would mean that maybe about 2 or 3 people in this group would have been heavy drinkers. The rest would have been casual drinkers. So alcohol is not the problem here. Although we make it as one of the big problems, alcohol is not the problem. So simplistic or wrong analysis can shift the management action in a non-productive direction. If we focus on alcohol, then we have missed the point altogether. These people are not drinking. The 80% are not drinking. Where does that help? Similarly, when you look at reasons for encounters, easily avoidable deaths. Only 15% of the deaths were due to open defecation cases. So again, it means 85% of your problem lies elsewhere. 85% of your problem actually comes from elephants intruding into human use areas. Nearly 83% of the attacks took place in human use areas. So your problem lies there. It's not to do with alcohol. It is not to do with open defecation. By and large, the bulk of your problem lies because elephants are coming into human use areas. So you need to address that if you want to solve the major bulk of your problem. Often we get side railed with things like alcohol, open defecation. Yes, it could be a major issue in some areas. I'm not saying no to that. But what I'm saying is, unless you analyze it very properly, systematically, you will not know what is the main cause of this thing. The other thing is, when we talk about research and this thing, particularly with elephants, there's a large amount of research which is coming out with all sorts of crazy solutions. Now, I done a study actually to look at putting a barrier about several kilometers of electric fencing, and there was also existing fence which was operational for several kilometers. And we are also using camera traps to see which elephants are coming. Now, what we found is that this particular elephant which came here at this point on 27th October, it got blocked by the fence. Then several days later, on November 29th actually, the male got killed, electrocuted at a point that's about 4.5 kilometers away from that location. So what it means is that this elephant is operating across a range of 4.5 kilometers. Across multiple agricultural areas and villages. Now, what happens is with the most experimental studies, they confine themselves to a few crop fields. They'll put some test on a few crop fields. They'll put test in 1 or 2 villages. They do not understand how animals operate. An animal finds something novel in a particular area, a few crop fields, it goes to adjacent crop fields and raids. If it finds a whole village block, it goes to the adjacent field. Now, we're talking about 4.5 kilometers away in another village, it gets electrocuted. It essentially proves that the animal will just go to another point, within its home range. We're not saying it'll leave its home range. So we need to be very careful about how we do our research, how we do our experiments in terms of new tools before saying they're successful or effective. Because if they are not tested on the scale that is required, then it's of little or no use in terms of conflict mitigation, because the results might then be very dubious and they might actually be not reflecting what is actually happening out there. This translocation studies, I'll not get into that because it's a different thing. Now, Karnataka Forest Department, because of the High Court case, this became a very complicated issue. High Court appointed a committee of which I also was a member. The important lesson from this was that it was the suo motu case taken up by the Karnataka High Court, which appointed a committee to look into this elephant conservation and also conflict mitigation. Now, ultimately, the committee came up with a suggestion after analyzing the whole problem, and also the forest department agreed to it, the government agreed to it, and then the High Court then said, yeah, this is the strategy I should use. So in this, what the basic component is that, yes, there, in terms of conservation, there will be an elephant conservation zone. It could be a tiger conservation. It could be anything, which is an inviolate area. Okay, it's only meant for the wildlife. Now, very typically, these kind of areas are very rare. It could be a tiger reserve with no settlements or no traditional rights. In Karnataka case, it would be like Bandipur Tiger Reserve, which neither has settlements nor has any rights. If people have any rights to access. So it becomes the exclusive elephant zone, where people do not go, only elephants live. Then we have what we call the majority of a forest, which are coexistence zones. Coexistence because there are settlements inside, there are villages inside, and or people have rights to NTFP, fuel wood, cattle grazing. Okay, so these are coexistence zones where we have to manage human use in those areas in a manner which does not become too detrimental to wildlife. At the same time, we manage wildlife in a way that it does not come out and create too many problems. Okay, now these two are zones where conservation takes place. Then we also found that elephants are sometimes leaving these areas and coming out into small areas, small patches where there's no conservation future. They don't have any survival, long-term survival or long-term conservation future. And as such, those locations are only conflict-generating locations. So these are classified as no elephant zone, means this particular animal cannot be allowed to live there. So essentially, it means removing those animals from there and putting them back into either coexistence or in elephant-only zone. So this clarity of zonation is very important when you look at conservation and conflict mitigation. If there is no clarity, then you're going to have conflict right across the zone and it's going to be unmanageable in a very short period of time. Like I pointed out earlier, whether you stop it at the periphery, whether you stop it when 20 elephants have gone and started living elsewhere, or whether you do it when 250 or you wait for 500. So in all this, what happens is that, okay, I've just drawn a rough diagram of stakeholders involved and positive and negative. Green shows positive, red shows. We realize that, there are a range of this thing, whether it's civil society through its community, through university, through NGOs, law enforcement agencies, all can play a positive. Civil administration can also play a positive role. Then community development agencies, whether it's rural, tribal, agriculture, education, they can play a positive or a negative role. They can also have an adverse impact. The community itself can have a positive and negative impact on conflict. Then we come to infrastructure and resource development agencies, whether it's highways, whether it's hydroelectric power, or whether it's this thing or any other developmental thing, mining, all these. They can play a positive and a negative role. In the sense, the positive when they constrain and manage their systems in a way that's not or too wildlife unfriendly and is conflict mitigation friendly. So all these people media is a very important component because it then directly involved with conflict conservation and conflict mitigation, and that in turn affects your outcome in terms of human wildlife conflict resolution. So we need to understand that multiple stakeholders are involved. Unless we engage everybody, we are not going to be able to solve this problem. So this is something else. Anyway, with that, I'd like to conclude. So if you have any questions, please. I know I went a bit fast and took a bit more time than normal. So if you have any questions, please.
Ajay, can you stop sharing the screen? Yeah. I'll put across some questions to you.
Yes.
There's a question by 43 elephants are at BTR, Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve. What kind of study will help carrying capacity building?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. The question is broken. Can I just read out my question?
Please go ahead.
Yes,
So actually, sir, I'm working around Bandhavgarh right now for the human-elephant conflict. So my first question to you would be that what do you think would be the deterrence for the elephants after they get habituated to the classical? There is a herd, there are in total about 43 elephants right now. And now they are increasing their range and the conflict is increasing and they are rampantly raiding the crop fields. So, say, one of the things I read somewhere is that the urine of another herd could actually act as a deterrent. If you kind of do a territory marking with that. So, one of being that, and in general, on a larger scale, like what kind of study, sir, would help, like radio collaring an elephant and studying the feeding pattern and carrying capacity? What do you think would be a solution to this?
Let me take a few minutes to explain that to you.
Sure, sir.
Everybody in general. See, essentially, elephant is a habitat generalist. Okay, it is found from semi-arid areas. In fact, in Africa, it's found in pure deserts also. To wet evergreen forest. So, rainfall in India, it ranges from 550, 600 millimeters to about 4,000-5,000 millimeters of rainfall. In Africa, same story. In Africa, it's even less, from 200 millimeters to 6,000 millimeters of rainfall. Being a habitat generalist, it will survive virtually everywhere. So that's not the issue. The second important thing here is that the most important component is the quality. So the assessment should be based on, do we want to have elephants in Bandhavgarh and surrounding areas? One, okay. And the answer to that will come from the fact that, okay, what is the extent of habitat I'm able to set aside for elephants? Okay, what is the extent of forest? Okay, first. How much forest do I have? How much is the thing? Forget the numbers. It might be 10 elephants at the beginning. Okay, you have 1,000 square kilometers, or let's say you have 2,000 square kilometers. Okay, then okay, fine. I'm setting aside 2,000 square kilometers. If you have that, great. Whatever it is, elephants in 250, 300, 400, 500 square kilometers. Let me be very clear about that. Particularly if you come down below 300, you are asking for a disaster in the field. Okay. For the simple reason, we have two examples of that. One is Dalma Wildlife Sanctuary, the other is Chinta Wildlife Sanctuary. If you study the history of two areas, you will understand that it's nothing but an unmitigated disaster to try and conserve elephants in small areas. They then start living everywhere else except inside a sanctuary. Okay. Now, I did the assessment of Chandka way back in 1988 or 89, I think. And Dalma was a study which I had designed, and a colleague of mine did the study. That was again back in the 90s. So anyway, when I went to Chandka in the beginning, there were about 150 elephants in that area. And they had taken up a huge, being the capital next to the capital, big project, multi-crore improvement and a whole range of other things. To develop it and to contain elephants inside by having elephant-proof trenches and habitat improvement and a whole range of other things. I think a few years ago, and I'd seen that the habitat had gone out and had occupied other areas in the constant conflict, huge amount of conflict outside Chandka area. In area. Now, more recently, I heard there are only 9 elephants left. Now, essentially what happens is, now, as I told what we call Chhattisgarh, that their problem will keep growing, expand. Madhya Pradesh, I remember telling somebody else in Madhya Pradesh that same thing. You don't think that they'll stay in Bandhavgarh, they'll go all over the place. And they will do that. So the question is that, okay, the government and the forest department decide that yes, we are going to set aside X amount of area. Let's assume it's going to be a reasonable amount of area for elephant conservation, and that is there. Then the next step is, now these elephants have become habituated to crop raiding. Okay, they are like an alcoholic. Okay. Now, if they're habituated, how are you going to break it? Now, you cannot appeal to their sensibilities to stop raiding crops. Okay, they're not going to listen to that. Okay, so you need to physically stop them, which means having a physical barrier to stop them from coming out.
Right.
Now, what has transpired? What are the things they have learned? Okay, what are the things they have learned during? Now, a person who's alcoholic has learned to rob, learned to shoot, learned to do all sorts of things. Now, you have to address all those. Others is going to use those tools to get past you. Okay. Now, also other important thing is you look at the age structure of these elephants. Okay. Now, if you look at all the males in that group will be below 20. That I can tell you sitting here without even looking at that. Okay. And at least more than half of the females will also be below 20 years of age. Okay. And these are the future generation, because the elephants are going to live for up to 60 years now. Okay. Then there'll be a few older females. Okay. Now the entire younger population which has come.
Sir, we can't hear you.
Ajay, you have got muted.
Yeah, I think he's got muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, I think you got muted, sir.
Okay, sorry. So essentially what happens is,
yes, sir,
the elephants, those which are below 20 years,
Right, sir.
are essentially animals which have lived, grown up in agricultural areas in crop breeding conditions. To them, that is perfectly natural behavior. Please understand the difference, okay? These are not elephants which think that living in human use areas, raiding crops on a daily basis, getting chased by people, chasing people is abnormal. Okay, they think it is normal daily life for them. Okay, because they've grown up in that entire area. Okay, they've never seen anything else. They are not animals which are used to growing up in a forest. They are not aware of what it means to grow and live in a forest. They are only aware. Now, how long has this experience been? It's a 20-year experience for them because they're born, because these elephants came to Chhattisgarh 20 years back. So all of them were born in Chhattisgarh in that kind of conditions. And they are now in Madhya Pradesh, they're continuing the same thing. Okay. They will essentially have what you call deeply embedded behavioral characteristics which are abnormal, not normal. So the only way to stop them is physical barriers. Okay. Physical barriers around the forest which will stop them from going out, okay, and which will confine them to forest, can eventually bring them back to a normal foraging cycle. Okay. In the absence of that, they will keep on coming out and raiding. Not only that thing, as and how people there use minor tools for conflict mitigation, like chasing, driving, as the people become more effective in chasing them away or driving them away, they will then respond to that efficiency by moving even further away. Okay? Because if I can't, if you're going to keep driving me when I'm sitting in this room, I'll go to the next room. Okay? Why? Because I'm used to that. Somebody has driven me from that room to another room, another room to another room. Now I've come to this room. Now in this room also, if somebody drives me to the next, because why? That is also part of my behavior. Okay? My behavior, things become difficult, I will move. Okay? These are the fundamental basic behavioral things we need to understand. So in terms of how to deal with elephants in Madhya Pradesh, the answer is simple. First, yes, we want elephants. Two, we are willing to put the money and the resources needed to conserve them. Okay? Because barriers and all are not going to come cheaply. Compensation is not going to come cheaply. You need money for that. The other thing is, I cannot do elephant conservation with 20 or 40 elephants. The population has to be over 200 if it's to be a genetically viable population. Okay? Now, genetically viable, if you don't have a genetically viable population, is pointless. So you need to understand that I need to be managing not 40 elephants, but I need to be prepared for 200 to 250 elephants in future. Okay? And that's short-term future. I'm not talking about long-term. So unless I can get that thing going, I'm not doing a conservation job. I'm just doing a zookeeper's work. Okay? I'm not a conservationist. So I'm not doing it in the real sense. So I need to be prepared to keep aside that kind of a support to ensure that there are 200 to 250 elephants at least living in that area to ensure long-term conservation. So that's one part. So once I decide that is what's going to be, the thing in line with that, I need to start preparing my other resources. Okay? So that becomes the then the other thing that's going to happen is, yes, we are going to get further intrusion of elephants from Chhattisgarh. Okay? That might continue for a while. As long as there's going to be disturbances in Jharkhand and Orissa with mining, and elephants keep moving out, they'll keep coming to Chhattisgarh. They'll extend because these are paths which animals are following. So the second question is, how many more do I allow inside and where do I allow them? Okay? So fine, you come to Bandhavgarh, it's a protected area, it's a good area, fine, I keep them there. But they come into an area which is now, if Bandhavgarh is protected and others, if they come to another area which is not protected and they're going to move around like how they're moving in some parts of Chhattisgarh, then I really start need to thinking about what I do with them. Yes, initially the idea will be to bring them and put them in the Bandhavgarh area because that's a designated conservation area. Okay. So it has to be worked out at a much higher level and decisions have to be made at the higher level. Right now, who's deciding? The divisional forest officer, right? He's got some help from the conservator. This is classically, this is not there. It should come from the secretary and PCCF and chief wildlife warden. It should come from MOAS. Okay, so the decision making has to take place there and not at the bottom.
Good evening, Ajay Desai. I'm from Satyanarayana, retired from the Wildlife AVC College. How are you, Ajay?
Namaste, how are you? How are you? Good to see you. Good to see you. Long time.
Very nice presentation, Ajay. Actually, you know that when we came, when this organization, you all working, they have been in the 1980s, and we visited Masala video also. It's some small hamlet those days. Now, when recently I went 2020 February, actually, what happened? I visited there. It is more in a town, very busy area.
It's a town now.
The other side is the Gudalur area. Gudalur also become a very big town now. And what will be the impact? What's your opinion with regard that? Definitely there will be some conflicts, and then maybe the elephant conflicts, other things. So what's your impact on this urbanization? Maybe it's like urbanization now. So what's your resource also?
Yeah, I did a study on conflict, giving a gap of almost 15 years in that area. And interesting changes as you see, in terms of crops grown, there's a complete change in the crops pattern. Okay, the crops which are grown. There's also increased crop production and other things. But what has happened is in that area, the seafood plateau has improved in quality because of the removal of the cattle pens from what was there earlier. Now, that has offset a lot of things. So conflict has remained more or less constant in some of the villages. But in places like, Bokapuram, where tourism has taken place, tourism resorts have come up in a huge way and they're blocking the corridor. Now, there, because of the increased electric fencing and other things, conflict has increased. It's among the only few places where conflict has increased, where corridors are being blocked. Not intentionally, but people are putting electric fences where elephants used to freely range across. And that is resulting in some level of conflict in that area. But otherwise, conflict is there, but people are putting more electric fences, more of the things. So defenses have gone up, crops have changed, and habitat has improved to some point. That is important. So those things, it gives a mixed this thing. But the conflict remains more or less constant to what it was earlier, except in a few localities.
So what about the Bodalur area? Earlier, there will be some human-elephant conflict. The number of cases coming to the forest for complaining.
Yeah, the number of cases coming up, but we need to also see one of the unrecognized things is the fact that animals which come into conflict eventually get killed. They get electrocuted, they get poisoned, they get this thing. So whereas the government might not be taking these animals out of the picture, people are taking them out. So there is a significant amount of what you call retaliatory killing, as we call it, or accidental deaths, where animals are getting electrocuted with low-hanging wires, getting injured in wells, pits, and such things. So that takeoff is there of animals that come into conflict. In fact, there was a very interesting comment made by one of the villagers, when we were working in Coimbatore. I was working more recently in Coimbatore. He said, we are talking about a particular elephant which was coming into conflict. His very casual statement, it was not that we're talking, when we mentioned those elephants and we're talking about, he said, no, such elephants will not last. They'll get and go. A villager is aware of the fact that animals which come into conflict eventually die out and go. So it means that, yes, there is conflict mitigation that is taking place. Now, for example, Sri Lanka was an interesting place where they have got a very poor management approach towards conflict, by and large. So Sri Lanka, they're killing elephants at the rate of, when I went there, it was about 150 elephants. Now it's gone to over 200 elephants per year are being killed due to conflict. Now, the department is not doing anything of this, but people are taking up these high conflict animals systematically.
Thank you, Ajay. Nice thing.
Mr. Jarnail Singh would like to know what are the crops that attract elephants and feasibility of crop changes in home range. Any repulsive technique to drive away elephants?
To start with, it's a question that always comes up. As I mentioned, the elephant is a habitat generalist and also it's a coarse feeder. Coarse means it eats virtually anything. It can be browse, it can be grass, it can be any other thing. So it will eat virtually any crop. Initially, any novel crop or new crop comes into the area, it will avoid that to some extent. Because it's something new, animals generally will not eat something new very readily unless it's related to something they're already eating. So by and large, what happens with these kind of crops is that new crops are introduced suddenly, then they might not damage them so much, but they eventually learn to eat them. And what I've seen across is like, for example, when I was working in Indonesia, they had this Acacia mangifera as a puffwood plantation. And people are talking about using that as a buffer between forest and oil palm, which oil palm was being damaged by elephant because it's a palm tree, it's regularly eaten. So they were talking about, I told them, see, as far as I'm aware, Acacia mangifera is an edible crop. tree, and today or tomorrow the elephants will start eating it. 10 years down the line, I went there and I saw that these acacia plantations are being very heavily damaged by elephants. And now the companies are now shifting to eucalyptus. I told them, don't worry, it'll start eating that also after some time. It just needs time to adapt. So in terms of crops, when we look at it, for example, lemongrass is one of the species which is not eaten, aromatic grass. And Uttarakhand is actually trying to develop lemongrass cultivation across some of the peripheral areas. Again, here there is a challenge, what we call is the marketing and the demand question, how many people can grow it and how much can be the thing and what will be the market value if everybody starts growing it. And what happens to the other crops. There are several things. So crops, as far as we can be aware of, is first thing that comes is what is the socio-cultural aspect. Because if many marginal farmers are growing crops for eating. They'll be growing ragi, they'll be growing millet, they'll be growing jawar, they'll be growing something else for eating purposes rather than for commercial sales purposes. So for them to shift to a non-edible crop for this thing becomes difficult. Also, if they want to shift to a tree crop, let's say oranges or something. Now, other interesting thing is oranges. Initially, they don't damage orange trees, but they eat oranges now in Kodugu. Coffee was another. People said, okay, it does not much of a problem, but now they're eating coffee grains, okay, the seeds. So they also, coffee, the main thing is the damage when they pass through, they break the trees and all that, but they're also eating coffee, this thing. So gradually, these are all things we are learning that they gradually pick up on these things and learn to eat. So crops, if you ask me, I would be very skeptical. Yes, the research needs to continue to find crops which are not going to be eaten is one. The other thing that has to be done is that we need to understand this might not be a very optimum approach to try and resolve conflict mitigation. The other important thing is if I put what we call is the buffer, as we call it, buffer between the forest and other agricultural areas. So people talk about having a buffer zone of crops which are not edible for elephants. Now, when you talk about a buffer zone, you must realize that elephants go on average in a normal forest area, they can go up to 3 kilometers outside to raid crops in dry season, where the intervening land is fallow and then there's a irrigated crop field which is growing banana or something 3 kilometers away. They'll walk up to 3 kilometers. So when we talk about this buffer zone using inedible crops or leaving a buffer zone of fallow areas, then it's not a viable option with elephants because they'll simply traverse across that and go. Very often, for example, they don't eat ginger. But most of the farmers who grow ginger in many areas suffer losses because the elephants trample through ginger and go and raid other crops. So that trampling effect has to be taken into consideration. The fact that they can go long distance has to be taken into consideration. Buffer is not a viable option for elephants.
Mr. Anil Bharadwaj, he has a comment. Your analysis of human-wildlife conflict is very systematic. Last time when you spoke in Kerala, they could not record your session, so they have requested for your session. With your permission, I will be giving your...
Bharadwaj can have anything he wants of mine.
Mr. Sunil Agrawal has a comment. Fragmentation of forest may also be the reason for conflict. We should make efforts to minimize the fragmentation. He would like to have your opinion on this.
Yeah. See, fragmentation impacts almost. See, this is an elephant-related thing. But if you look at tigers, if you look at leopards, if you look at your nilgai, you look at any spotted deer, anything, where we have a protection and the animal has come in number, and then where we have what you call forest degradation, will impact all species. Fragmentation is a very challenging thing because one other thing we need to understand, where you all, particularly as forest officers, you all have inherited certain problems. Okay, you all have no, it's not that you have created this for yourself or anything. These are, go back to the time of, Maharajas and all, when forests were cleared, then come to the British period when large amounts of forests were cleared, then comes to the pre-independence, independence period, when sort of things happened. So many of the things we look at are inherited problems, as I call it. Okay, inherited. Okay, this is part of your grandfather's loan which you are trying to pay. So we need to understand fragmentation has taken place. The other important thing in all this is to understand where existing land fragmentation cannot be restored. Okay, in the sense that yes, it's completely gone, the fragmentation has happened, it cannot be restored, leave it, because then you talking about it doesn't help. But where there is a feasibility of connecting and where there is a feasibility of an existing corridor, in those cases, what we need to understand is that we need to actually ensure that those connectivities continue, they are enhanced or they are restored. Okay, where it's not possible, just leave it, because it's impractical to try and rebuild a connectivity which is completely fragmented, where there are hundreds of acres of agricultural land, several villages between that. Those things may not be possible, but we need to look at the system in terms of what is possible. So in these fragmented areas, we must also understand is, if I'm going to keep a fragmented patch with the wildlife, then is it adequate for the species? Is it adequate for long-term conservation? If it's not adequate, then I need to manage numbers in that area. I need to resort to what we call is metapopulation management, movement of males between the areas. I don't allow them to transit through agriculture, but I shift them, capture and shift and change this thing. So metapopulation management tools are there to manage fragmented areas, smaller areas, which may not genetically be viable, but with metapopulation management, they become viable. But yeah, then conflict mitigation around that fragmented patch has to be done in a very systematic way.
Mr. Bharadwaj wants to say, currently we are in the process of preparing national level and state level strategies for mitigation of HWC. Do you think there is a need for continuation of expert teams in unfolding these strategies in some area after preparation of the same?
I would say this. See, the biggest step, obviously, Ministry of Environment and Forest, and obviously that is based on the government of India. This conflict is a huge problem. Okay, it's not that it's a small problem; it's a very big problem. They've taken this in a very for the first time, they've taken a very approach, whereby they're looking at all these structures coming down very systematically, which is very good, and which when it comes and is fully implemented, and obviously it's a growing process. It will be an adaptive thing. It will continue improving. It's a very important tool that comes into place. But along with that, what then happens is, when we talk about site-specific or state-specific or even sometimes landscape-specific groups, it's a collection of minds looking at specific issues. When you look at the larger national level things, or even at the state level strategy, these are policy tools. They are much broader guidelines. Now, very specifically, it's the case of Bandhavgarh. What do we do with those elephants? Now, it could be the state sits down and decides, the first question obviously is, do I want elephants or do I not want elephants? Elephants come with a package of benefits, they come with a package of problems. So the state government can sit down with the experts, whatever it is, and decide, say, yes, these are the challenges that are there now. Do we want to take up these challenges or not? Then they say, yes, we will take up the challenges, we are up to it. We can do this, and okay. Then the question comes is, what exactly should we do it? I'm sitting here and telling you very casually, okay, which is a joke, because on the ground, if you ask me to resolve that problem, it's more complex, as you all know. So yes, then comes the actual implementation of that. It's very easy for us to say we'll do this, we'll do that. But the actual implementation is a challenge, where teams can then function, focus, and say, yes, this is how it should be done, this is how it should be used. There could also be, no matter how big a collection of minds we use, there could always be very small things which we miss out. And I'll quite frankly tell you that throughout my career, I have had very deep insights given to me about conflict mitigation or conservation or animal this thing by people who are not exactly called experts. Or we could say young students sometimes. It could be a forest guard, it could be a DFO, it could be a conservator, who's not primarily focused on something. But he just casually says, Ajay, what about that? And then you suddenly think, oh my God, yeah, that is a very important thing. So these things are what we call is a growing conflict mitigation strategy, or like any other strategy for a country, is a growing problem. Now the country has had what we call is a approach to planning, strategic 5-year plans. Whether we call it planning commission or we call it Niti Aayog, it's an ongoing thing. We have a national policy of how and where we are going, but those things keep coming up because there are challenges coming constantly. So I think those things should continue.
Yeah, Mr. Suresh Thorat would like to know, elephants being also being kept as pets, is there any policy for those kind of elephants, pet elephants?
See, once the elephant is the captive animal, it comes under, it's still partially under this thing, but partially also under livestock, this thing. The main challenge comes from a few states only. Kerala is one of the typical ones because there's a large amount of demand. It's become a commercial activity rather than a pet or anything. It's become a commercial activity in Kerala for private owners to lease out elephants to temples and such. Then also we have a lot of elephants in the northeast. Again, that has come about mainly central and northeast. Again, it has come out because of the sudden die down in the logging industry, which stopped their work earlier. They were given out for logging purposes to the forest department. That has stopped. So those elephants remain unemployed and often used in all sorts of odd things. But again, it depends on the state policy. It's something we need. Groups like Dr. Bharadwaj was mentioning. Do we need people? Yes, we do need people. We need to people state at state level. The center dictating sometimes may not be the option. But yes, at the state level, they could sit around and say, yes, this is our needs. For example, when I conducted the range-wide meeting in Malaysia, all 13 Asian elephant ranges, the question we posed to them at that time was, do you want captive elephants to continue? If so, how you want to use them? And if so, how are you going to manage those populations? So each country then came up with this very good approach, saying that Bhutan said, no, we don't want captive elephants. We have a few captive elephants. We won't breed them. And we'll let them live their lives out and then die out, and that's fine with us. Bangladesh said it's going to be a market-oriented thing. There will be a demand. People will keep them. They'll breed them. Once the demand dies down, the animal will go. Some other states said, no, we have this problem, large number of problem elephants which we need to capture, train, and use them. And so we have to find use for them in patrolling, in anti-depredation and other things. But what was the critical thing was that they all agreed that, yes, we need to have a clear plan for captive elephants in the long term. What do we want to do with these? How many do we need? How do we manage that population? If we don't want them, how do we manage that population so that eventually they all die out of old age and then there are no replacement? Or if we want more, then how do we get those more? Do we have a breeding program? Do we bring in high conflict animals and train them? Do we take elephants from other countries or states for such use? So essentially what happens is that there is a state level policy, there could be a national level policy on this. But by and large, private ownership is not something that I advocate. Forest department has a much better management system and where they're put to practical and good use. I think that is fine.
Mr. Divyang Singh Chauhan, who is our chairman, he has a specific comment on this thing. An excellent presentation with lots of practical studies. And he has expressed his opinion that you are a living legend as far as human wildlife.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
That's the comment from our chairman.
A student, ongoing student who still is open to listening from you.
Mr. Jarnail Singh has to know from you, wishes to know from you, the difference between problem resolution in the north and south within our country.
That's a very challenging question, but I would not have so much experience in terms of individual problem resolution. But by and large, I think they're very similar. Some states are making a very big stride, in the sense that they have realized that the traditional continue with the existing approaches is not working, and we need to move on to new approaches where they're trying to look at innovative things, which is a very good thing. And that, I think, will start catching on with most states when they realize that we really need to shift gear. See, the major problem I find with the forest department, as such all of you all, is that one is there is a tendency of not documenting, one. A lot of success stories which remain within the division, which sometimes remain within the circle or within the forest department, state forest department, and never get out. This is the thing we have tried, this is how it worked in this kind of condition, and therefore this can be tried in similar conditions. And how it was done, that is one. So the documentation is not there. The sharing of universal knowledge universally is not very common. Yes, two officers meeting, there's a usual meeting, then sometimes the topic comes to some problem issue, and then yes, there is a sharing of information, but a systematic sharing, I'm saying, you have tried something, it has become successful, and it is put out in the public domain. It's put out in the forest. I'll give one example. I mean, taking time, but I'm sorry. For example, see what happens with Karnataka. I'm giving Karnataka. It's not that Karnataka only does it, but one example I'm talking about. Now, there is a particular corridor in Karnataka where we had revenue forest areas. Okay, revenue forest under the revenue department. Between the Tiger Reserve, where the Tiger River constricted to a patch which was about 50 meters wide. On one side, there was a 50-meter escarpment. There was a deep escarpment where animals could not move in, and there was a 50-meter wide corridor of flat land. And after that, it was revenue department land, non-forest, non-RF land. And beyond that, about 500 meters, the actual agriculture started. The first step the department did was they talked to the revenue department, and they got that 500 meters of revenue land transferred to the forest. Now, so it's okay. So the corridor then became 500 meters wide. To the north of the settlement, also there was revenue land. Okay, what they then did is they also worked with the collector and other things, and they got that thing transferred to the forest department, and that also became RM. So now what you have was where there was a 50-meter corridor. Okay, now you have a 500-meter corridor on the bottom, and you have more than 500-meter corridor on the north. Okay, so two big corridors. Just by working with the revenue department, yes, they took the help of some politically influential people to get here. You have to go around the bush. You just can't go directly. So they managed to convince those people. And now, see, the thing is, where is it documented? Nowhere. In fact, for the lower corridor, some NGOs are taking credit. Okay. Where they had nothing to do with it. So my point is, we know these kind of things are there. We know there are a lot of tools that are being used. And I mean, I know because see, my problem has been I work very closely with the forest department, virtually work inside the forest department. So I see a lot of things. But then a lot of these things are not getting documented going out. So the sharing of information, the sharing of success stories is very, very low, if you ask my personal thing. So unless that changes, we will not be able to understand tools because we do not know what Madhya Pradesh is doing. Now, see, there are many things I hear anecdotally. Okay, like recently I heard, okay, that the rewilding of tigers, I think 6 or 9 cubs were done in Madhya Pradesh. Okay, I didn't know that till then. Now, till I met, now, see, when we're talking about rewilding, now people are not even aware of this thing. And it's a very important tool, especially when we talk in terms of metapopulation management and such things. Yes, the collar transportation of forest canal, I can understand, yeah, a lot of publicity and all that. But what about these kind of things which are very important, which are not there at all? Then other thing I knew was the Bara Singer reintroduction. Now that I just happened to understand and realize because I met Dr. Rajan Gopal, who had done it when he was in Khana. Okay. Now again, something that has been buried inside somewhere which is not known. I mean, I don't know how many such cases are there all around. So I think there's a important angle
of sharing.
So Ajay, our former guru, or our guru rather, Mr. Vishwas Savarkar, Mr. V.V. Savarkar is on the session, and he has expressed his wishes to you. Excellent presentation, as usual. That's what he says, and it was a pleasure to hear you.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, Happy.
It was nice to have Mr. Savarkar and Mr. Janel Singh, Mr. Suresh Thorat, then Mr. Agrawal, then Dr. Anil Bharadwaj on this session.
Yeah, many of the people I look up to a lot.
I think, Shraddha, if you have any questions, because you have asked lots of questions.
No, sir, actually, Janel Singh sir had one more question. I think you missed out by mistake. What are ways out to check overpopulation in a particular home range?
So that you're asking me the most complex question. But I'll give a very realistic answer because I don't believe in, I believe in calling a spade, and whether people like it or no, it's not an issue. But I know people like you all are very open. But see, we are talking about, the first step could obviously be to what we call, rewild certain areas. In the sense that we do have many areas in the country which are lacking in terms of wildlife numbers, where our wildlife populations are depleted. Yes, the initial step is obviously to make those things more wildlife friendly, in the sense of give the degradation, you arrest the degradation, whatever, and then you think of restocking those. If the X area has too many leopards or tigers, maybe I then introduce them into Y area, which has got low numbers because of certain problems which I've resolved now. So that could be one of the first steps. The other step is we are talking about very strongly is immunocontraception, which on the face of it sounds very this thing, but the question really comes to how do I implement this kind of a thing? Okay, in the wild, when we talk about it, we're talking about darting animals and all that. The minute you dart one or two animals, the rest are not going to be waiting for you. Or once they realize that this vehicle comes and they dart, then they're not going to be responsive enough to allow you to dart. So all these challenges are there, which we are not really addressing in a big way.
So Ajay, before I go on to conclude this session, I have one question for you. Usually, where the elephants have already been there and the conflict has already been there have been various transformations and various changes according to timelines and all that. The problem is really in the areas where they are invading or dispersing newly. It's like what happened in Chhattisgarh, then now it is happening in Bandhavgarh. In such areas, people are new to these kind of situations, and in these kind of situations, what is the message for the managers there, or the non-government organizations, or the line departments working there?
The message, the problem, you already mentioned the point, people are not aware of elephants or how to live with elephants is the first challenge. So it's like bringing a well-trained, it's like, there's got to be a problem, and you got a well-trained problem solver, then yes, the problem is big, he can deal with it. That's what happens in our regular elephant areas. The people, the forest department there is used to dealing with these kind of elephants. The people there are used to dealing with elephants. So the approach is very well balanced. But here what happens is you got an elephant which is well used to conflict, very challenging elephant. Okay, coming into an area where people have no skills. When I say people, I'm talking about the community and the forest department have no skill. Nor do any of the line departments have any skill in that. So to them, it's like a shock. And which is the reason why we have very high number of human deaths in those kind of areas. Because the animals are complete, their lifestyle is completely different. If I'm walking in an area where, for me to go into any forest, my first thing I think about is that where is the danger going to come from? To me, it's always that, if I'm in an elephant area or a non-elephant area also, my eyes are always looking for things. Why? Because I've been trained for only that. I've learned to live that way. But if I take my friends from my town or something and go there, they will not even look at what danger is. Even if there's an elephant, they might not even see it. So the challenge there is that you got a challenging elephant. It's not a regular elephant. It's a highly trained elephant in terms of conflict creation, and that elephant is coming in an area where nobody has any skill. So if we are looking at conflict mitigation, I would say that we need to have this cross-state linkage in the first place, because you then need to bring in people from outside. Chhattisgarh has done that in the sense because they brought in mouths, they brought in elephant trackers from outside to deal with this kind of things. Yeah, to at least train local people. So that is important. You get those people there immediately and start dealing with. Second is you very immediately start. We need to have policy on this. Because policy could be, we will not allow dispersal because elephants create a lot of problems. Yeah, we have lost thousands of people because of dispersals, but so because we will not do that. Fine, that's a blanket national decision. We will not allow dispersal of elephants. If they try to come out, we'll push them back. We'll relocate them back and put barriers. The decision is they'll allow to disperse freely where they want to go. And I will try and conserve them wherever it is at whatever cost. So there we start putting in the money, we put in the people from the other states who know how to do that to help the local staff and the people, and put in the money to put the barriers, everything, and we start doing that. Or three, we can say that, okay, we'll look at it case by case. Okay, in this area, there's dispersal taking place. In the long term, there seems no future for elephants in this area, and consequently, will not allow dispersal in this area. In the other case, we say, okay, this is a good potential for range expansion. This is a good potential for conservation. We allow dispersal in this area. Yes, then you put your money there. So it has to be what we call a very structured approach to such things. And dispersals are going to be challenging. And tigers are going to be the next in the list of big dispersing animals. The way we are tiger conservation is succeeding. We are getting tigers all over the place.
Tiger, elephant, both.
So, well, Ajay, it was really a pleasure having you on this session, and it was a long-awaited session, rather. And we will be hearing more from you because I am very happy to have being associated with Ajay now. He being also agreed to be our scientific advisor now. So a lot to learn from him. I also would like to thank Mr. Savarkar, Mr. Jarnail Singh, Mr. Suresh Thorat sir, Mr. Agrawal, Mr. Dr. Bharadwaj, and all the other delegates who have attended today's session. And Ajay, if it comes to elephants, the first name which comes to my mind is Ajay. And when it comes to dealing or mitigating conflicts or attempts to mitigate conflicts, then it's again you. So it would have been nothing better than having you on this session for knowing about the human-wildlife conflict, with emphasis basically on elephants. And most of our colleagues and some of our trainees in future, they would like to hear from you, and we would like to formulate certain strategies with you for the future. And keeping all this in mind, we wish you and all the delegates who are attending a very safe and a healthy life in these challenging situations. And we keep seeing each other on every Sunday of this session. And we have maintained a trend that our previous speakers usually attend our following sessions. So I would request Ajay to be on our sessions in future also.
Yeah.
So, and this session was streamed live. The links were sent live, and it will be on the YouTube for all the viewers. And I will be sending copies to all the delegates who have attended. The recorded copies will be disseminated to them with thanks for all my gratitude to them. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ajay. Thank you very much for sparing so much of time.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure listening to you. Thank you, Savarkar, sir, for sparing time to be with us. Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. Have a nice weekend. So we have eaten up most of it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Goodbye, Ajay.
Bye.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.